The most dangerous man is the one who needs nothing. Most people spend their entire lives chasing power. More money, more influence, more respect, more attention. They believe power is something you accumulate. The silent strategist sees it differently. Power is often revealed by what you no longer need. Because every need creates a negotiation. Every dependency creates leverage. Every craving creates a chain. And every chain can be pulled by someone else. Imagine two kings standing on opposite sides of a battlefield. The first king protects his throne because he fears losing it. The second king knows something different. If the throne disappeared tomorrow, he would still remain a king. One rules because of what he owns. The other rules because of who he has become. History always remembers the second man. The world teaches you to collect. Collect followers. Collect approval. Collect status. Collect possessions. Collect recognition. Very few people are taught something much more valuable. How to let go. Because letting go removes fear. And when fear disappears, manipulation loses its foundation. Think about it. How do people control someone? They threaten to take away something that person cannot imagine living without. Sometimes it's money. Sometimes it's love. Sometimes it's reputation. Sometimes it's belonging. Sometimes it's hope. But what happens when a man quietly discovers that his identity was never attached to those things? Suddenly, every threat becomes smaller. Not because life became easier, because fear became weaker. Years ago, I watched an old mountain guide preparing a group of climbers. Everyone expected him to inspect the ropes first. Instead, he inspected their backpacks. One by one, he removed unnecessary equipment, extra clothes, heavy tools, items they believed they might need. The climbers complained, "What if we need those later?" The guide smiled. The mountain doesn't defeat people because they carry too little. It defeats them because they carry too much. I never forgot that lesson. Because life works the same way. Most people aren't crushed by what happens to them. They're crushed by everything they refuse to release. Old resentments, old identities, old relationships, old fears, old expectations. The silent strategist travels light. Not because he owns less, because he depends on less. There's a sentence that changes the way you see human behavior forever. Whoever needs the least negotiates from the strongest position. Read that again. In business, in friendships, in romantic relationships, in leadership, in conflict, the person willing to walk away always possesses invisible power. Not because walking away is the goal, because freedom always changes the balance. Imagine two men sitting across from each other negotiating a contract. One desperately needs the deal. The other already has 10 opportunities waiting. Who feels calmer? Who asks better questions? Who accepts fewer compromises? Who leaves with greater respect? Confidence often has very little to do with personality. Sometimes, it is simply the natural result of having options. The silent strategist creates one option above all others: the ability to leave. For years, I misunderstood strength. I thought strength meant enduring everything, remaining available, always understanding, always forgiving, always proving my loyalty. Eventually, life taught me something painful. People don't always respect the man who stays. Sometimes, they respect the man who knows when to leave. That realization became one of the deepest foundations of the Dark Mind Protocol. Because true psychological freedom begins the moment your self-worth no longer depends on what other people decide to give you. Inside the Dark Mind Protocol, I teach the complete philosophy behind emotional independence, strategic thinking, psychological resilience, and becoming the kind of man who cannot be controlled because he no longer negotiates with his own values. If you've ever felt trapped by the fear of losing people, opportunities, or approval, you'll find a complete framework waiting for you in the first pinned comment. Today, we're going to explore why the most dangerous man in any room is rarely the loudest. He isn't the richest. He isn't the most aggressive. He isn't the most admired. He is simply the man who needs nothing from anyone to remain completely himself. And once you understand why, you'll never look at power the same way again. Chapter 2. Every need creates a handle. There is a reason experienced negotiators never appear desperate. Not because they don't care about the outcome, because they understand something the average person never learns. The moment the other side senses that you need something, the negotiation changes. Imagine holding a rope during a game of tug-of-war. The tighter you grip it, the easier it becomes for someone else to pull you. Need works exactly the same way. The more desperately you cling to approval, the easier approval controls you. The more desperately you cling to a relationship, the easier that relationship controls you. The more desperately you cling to your reputation, the easier criticism controls you. The silent strategist asks a question that very few people ever ask themselves. Who is holding the rope? Because the answer explains almost every power imbalance you'll ever experience. The invisible currency. Most people think money is the world's most valuable currency. It isn't. Attention is. Whoever controls your attention quietly influences your life. Think about your average day. How many decisions were truly yours? How many emotions were triggered by someone else's opinion? A notification, a message left unanswered, a compliment, a criticism, a social media post. Without realizing it, many people spend their lives allowing strangers to manage their emotional economy. The silent strategist protects his attention the way kings once protected gold, because he knows something profound. Where attention goes, identity follows. Imagine an ancient fortress built on top of a mountain. Its greatest defense isn't taller walls. Its location. The climb itself discourages most attackers. The strongest men create emotional fortresses in the same way. Not through arrogance, through selectivity. Not everyone receives immediate access. Not every opinion receives immediate importance. Not every invitation deserves acceptance. Not every conflict deserves participation. Scarcity creates value. Easy access creates familiarity. The silent strategist never becomes unavailable to appear important. He simply refuses to make himself emotionally available to chaos. The man who could not be bought history is filled with powerful men. Kings, generals, politicians, businessmen. Most lost power the same way. Someone discovered their price. Sometimes it was money, sometimes status, sometimes fear, sometimes love. Once your price is known, your freedom becomes negotiable. Now imagine a man whose principles cannot be purchased, whose integrity cannot be rented, whose peace cannot be exchanged for temporary comfort. What leverage remains? Very little. That is why character has always been more dangerous than charisma. Charisma attracts people. Character makes manipulation expensive. Years ago, a wealthy merchant visited an old philosopher. He proudly displayed expensive watches, tailored suits, luxury cars, and homes around the world. Finally, he smiled and asked, "What do you think?" The philosopher looked around quietly, then answered, "You own many beautiful things. Just make sure none of them ever begin owning you." The merchant laughed. Years later, he lost almost everything. His businesses collapsed. His friends disappeared. His confidence vanished with his possessions. At that moment, it became obvious he had never owned those things. His identity had depended on them. The silent strategist builds differently. He enjoys success, but he never builds his identity on anything life can take away. The strongest position is always freedom. Imagine a bird sitting on the branch of a tree. Does the bird trust the branch? No. The bird trusts its wings. That is why it never panics when the branch begins to move. Most people build confidence on branches. Their job, their relationship, their appearance, their popularity. The silent strategist builds confidence on wings. Discipline, competence, resilience, adaptability, wisdom, things that travel with him wherever life takes him. That is real security, not certainty about the future. Confidence in your ability to face whatever the future brings. Before we continue, ask yourself something honestly. If everything external disappeared tomorrow, your job, your status, your possessions, your relationships, would you still recognize yourself? Or have you unknowingly allowed those things to become your identity? That question is uncomfortable, But uncomfortable questions create extraordinary lives. Inside the Dark Mind Protocol, one of the deepest lessons is learning to separate who you are from what you have. Because once those two become independent, fear loses much of its influence. And when fear loses influence, so do the people who once controlled you through it. If you're ready to build that kind of inner foundation, you'll find a complete framework waiting for you in the first pinned comment. There is one final illusion, perhaps the most dangerous illusion of all. It convinces millions of men that happiness lies in acquiring more. More success, more admiration, more possessions. But what if real freedom begins? The moment you realize you already have enough? That is where our journey continues. Chapter 3. The collapse of control. There's a moment in every power dynamic that most people never notice. It happens quietly, without announcement, without confrontation, without drama. It is the moment when control stops working. Not because someone resisted it, but because someone stopped responding to it. Control is not a force. It is a reaction loop. One person applies pressure, the other responds. One creates tension, the other tries to resolve it. One withdraws attention, the other chases. One creates uncertainty, the other fills it with emotion. This loop continues until something breaks. But the break is rarely loud. It is silent, a shift, a pause, a different response, or no response at all. Imagine a puppet theater. Every movement depends on strings. Every emotion depends on timing. Every reaction depends on direction. As long as the puppeteer pulls the strings, the performance continues. But there is a hidden truth. The puppet was never alive. It only moved because it believed movement was required. The moment it stops responding, the illusion collapses. Not gradually, instantly. Most people believe control is taken by force. But in reality, control is often given away through participation. Think about arguments. Have you ever noticed how some people seem impossible to argue with? Not because they win, but because they refuse to enter the emotional game. No escalation, no emotional defense, no justification spiral. Just calm responses, or silence. And suddenly, the entire structure of the argument loses weight. Because arguments require two participants. Without participation, there is no conflict, only noise. The silent strategist understands something critical. Energy is the foundation of control. Attention feeds it. Reaction sustains it. Emotion amplifies it. Without these elements, control becomes empty structure. A system without power. A shadow without substance. Years ago, I watched a conversation between two men that changed how I understood human behavior. One man was visibly frustrated, his voice rising, his gestures sharp. He was trying to force understanding. The other man remained calm, almost detached. He didn't interrupt, didn't defend, didn't correct every detail. He simply listened, occasionally nodded, and said very little. After 10 minutes, the frustrated man stopped talking, not because he was convinced, but because he had nothing left to push against. That silence ended the interaction more effectively than any argument could have. The point where manipulation dies, manipulation doesn't fail when it is exposed. It fails when it is ignored. Not emotionally ignored, psychologically ignored. There's a difference. Emotional ignoring is anger disguised as silence. Psychological ignoring is absence of participation. One is still engagement. The other is freedom. The silent strategist does not try to outplay manipulation. He removes the conditions that make manipulation possible. If guilt is used, he stops over-identifying with responsibility that isn't his. If pressure is used, he slows down decision-making. If silence is used, he does not chase meaning that was never communicated. If emotional chaos is introduced, he refuses to match it. And slowly, the system collapses, not because he fought it, but because he stopped feeding it. There is a simple principle hidden in all human interaction. Whatever receives your emotional energy grows in importance, even if it is negative, especially if it is negative. This is why some conflicts never end, because attention keeps them alive. The silent strategist understands something deeper. Starvation is more powerful than resistance, because resistance still gives energy to the problem. Starvation removes it completely. Imagine a fire. Most people try to fight fire with force. They argue with it, push against it, react to it. But fire does not respond to emotion. It responds to fuel. Remove the fuel, and the fire disappears on its own. No victory required. No confrontation needed. Just absence of supply. Before we continue, think about the last time someone tried to provoke you emotionally. Did the situation escalate because of what they said, or because of how much energy you gave it? That distinction is everything, because it reveals something most people never admit. Control is not taken. It is often maintained through response. Inside the Dark Mind Protocol, one of the most important psychological shifts I teach is this. Stop treating emotional triggers as instructions. They're not commands. They are tests. And the man who passes the test is the man who does not react automatically. If you're ready to train that level of control into your daily behavior, you will find a complete framework in the first pinned comment. There is only one final chapter left, and it explains what happens when a man no longer reacts to the world, but instead begins to move through it with complete internal independence. That is where everything changes. Chapter 4. When the world can no longer push you, there is a final stage of power that very few people ever reach. It is not loud. It is not emotional. It is not dramatic. It is calm, almost invisible. A man who reaches this stage no longer reacts to life as something happening to him. He moves through life as something happening through him. This shift is subtle, but irreversible. At this level, external events still occur. People still speak. Situations still change. Conflicts still appear. But none of it defines direction anymore. Because direction no longer depends on reaction. It depends on intention. Most people live like leaves in the wind. Every opinion moves them. Every criticism bends them. Every approval lifts them. Every rejection drops them. Their identity shifts constantly based on external pressure. The silent strategist becomes something else entirely. Not a leaf, a tree, rooted, stable, unmoved by temporary weather. The final weakness of manipulation, all manipulation shares one dependency. It needs access. Access to emotion. Access to attention. Access to identity. Access to fear. Access to desire. Remove access, and influence disappears. Not slowly, immediately. Because influence is not self-sustaining. It must be received. There is a reason experienced leaders are difficult to manipulate. It is not because they hear less criticism. It is because criticism no longer defines their internal state. It passes through them, without altering direction. This is misunderstood as arrogance. But it is not arrogance. It is insulation. The silent advantage. Imagine standing in the center of a crowded city. Noise everywhere, movement everywhere, people rushing, shouting, reacting, competing for attention. Now, imagine one person standing still in the middle of it all. Not frozen, not disconnected, but grounded, observing without being consumed. That stillness becomes noticeable, not because it is loud, but because everything else is. The silent strategist develops that stillness internally, even in emotional chaos. He remains structurally calm, and that calm changes how others interact with him. Because unstable systems cannot anchor to stable ones. They either stabilize or move away. The disappearance of leverage at some point. Something interesting happens. People stop trying to push you emotionally, not because they respect you more, but because it no longer works. The usual patterns stop producing results. Guilt fails. Pressure fails. Silence fails. Charm fails. Confusion fails. And when nothing works anymore, the system collapses into one of two outcomes: respect or withdrawal. Either way, control is gone. The man who no longer negotiates with himself, the deepest transformation is not external. It is internal. The moment a man stops negotiating with his own principles, he becomes extremely difficult to influence. Because most manipulation does not happen between people. It happens inside the person. Self-doubt, second-guessing, overthinking, guilt loops, fear of rejection, fear of loss, fear of being misunderstood. The silent strategist learns to observe these patterns without obeying them. He does not eliminate emotion. He stops letting emotion lead decisions. That is the difference. Years ago, I thought strength meant never being affected. Now I understand something more accurate. Strength is not the absence of influence. It is the presence of awareness. Awareness creates choice, and choice removes compulsion. There's an old idea in philosophy that says, you cannot control external events, but you can control your response. The silent strategist takes this further. He controls what deserves a response at all, because not everything external deserves internal participation. And that distinction changes everything. Final reflection: if you remove everything from this entire series, every story, every analogy, every concept, one idea remains. Need creates control, and the absence of need creates freedom. This is why the most dangerous man is not the strongest, not the richest, not the most aggressive. It is the man who no longer negotiates his identity for approval. Because once a man stops needing validation from the world loses the ability to define him. And when that happens, something irreversible takes place. He becomes ungovernable by emotional pressure, not because he fights it, but because it no longer applies. Inside the Dark Mind Protocol, this is the foundation of everything I teach. Emotional independence, psychological clarity, strategic thinking, boundary discipline, and the ability to remain centered even when the world around you is not. If this message resonated with you, then you already understand the direction this is pointing. You will find the complete system in the first pinned comment. Remember this: most people are controlled not by others, but by their own needs. Approval, validation, fear avoidance, comfort, identity protection. Remove those dependencies, and control loses its grip. Not because the world changes, but because you no longer participate in the mechanisms that allow it to control you. And in that moment, you stop reacting to life and begin directing it. That is the final stage of the silent strategist. Not dominance, not aggression, not superiority, but independence, complete internal freedom. And once you reach that point, no one controls you again.